KPMG chief economist Brendan Rynne believes that people like you and I, who might agree that reducing immigration would be a very smart thing to do, particularly while there's a housing crisis, he sees that as short-sighted and knee-jerk. Rynne claims that if Australia turns away skilled migrants at this time, there is a risk they won't come back later on. Well, any skilled migrant worth his or her salt wouldn't come to a country that couldn't house them. But Leith Van Onselen from Macro Business, chief economist and co-founder of Macro Business, has had a bit to say about this. There were some claims made yesterday about wage levels and the like that are just rubbish. And to think they come out from someone as senior as this gentleman is, I think, more than a little surprising. Anyway, Leith Van Onselen from macrobusiness.com.au is on the line. Happy New Year, my friend. I hope you're well.
Yeah, I am well. Thanks, Luke, and same to you.
Thank you so much. Brendan Rynne, he comes out and he says, cutting immigration, short-sighted, knee-jerk, saying that if we turn away skilled migrants, maybe we can allow skilled migrants in and just cut down some of the other stuff, like the extraordinarily high temporary education visas and the like. Maybe we could handle it that way. But he's way out of line here. I don't mean necessarily in his behaviour, but in his points of view. I mean, they almost contradict everything that good people like you have been saying for ages about all of this.
Yeah, it does. Look, they were quite frankly ridiculous claims that Rynne made yesterday. Basically, what he said that we can't have any cuts to immigration because if we do so, that's going to, wreck Australia's productivity and then lower per capita growth, and then that will lower wages ultimately. But the whole thing is that his comments don't match the empirical evidence that we've experienced over the past 20 years. Now, as all the listeners probably know, we massively ramped up immigration in the mid-2000s. We more than doubled it. So, and most of those are supposedly skilled migrants. So, we run this so-called skilled migration system. And what we've actually experienced over the past 20-odd years is a collapse in Australia's productivity, the worst per capita GDP growth in decades, and obviously we've had the poorest real wage growth and income gains, as well. So the empirical evidence is that we did exactly what he wants, which is ramp up immigration, and everything got worse. And all this tells you is that his claims aren't worth a pinch of salt, and they're actually wrong. And in fact, one of the reasons why we've had such poor productivity and such poor outcomes is because we ramped up immigration so viciously.
Yeah.
Because what that did was it effectively meant that the growth in the population was a lot faster than the growth in business investment, housing, infrastructure, all those sorts of things. And what that basically means is that the economy has gotten what's called capital shallowing, which basically means we've got less capital stock per person. And what that does is that ends up destroying productivity.
Yeah.
And effectively, the solution is to do the opposite of what he said, make the system smaller but actually more highly skilled, rather than what we've done, which is call it a skilled migration system that's not, and just basically make it volume-based rather than quality-based. That's effectively it.
So the idea that there's more of us sharing the pie and the pie hasn't grown is the idea of the example best, I think, for people to get the point here. If you increase the population but you don't increase the size of the pie by the same amount, then everyone's share of that pie has got to be smaller. Isn't that true?
Yeah, that's right. And if you're a Sydney sider and you live in Sydney, you've experienced this firsthand. I mean, nobody would argue that the growth in the stock of infrastructure has kept up with population growth, or the growth in housing, the growth in water supplies, all those sorts of things. If they don't keep up, basically you get lower living standards and you end up with lower productivity. And that's effectively what Australia's whole growth model has been for the past 20-odd years.
Yeah.
It's just basically bringing massive volumes of people. And that grows the overall economy in terms of GDP growth, but everyone's slice of the pie doesn't grow as fast. And once you factor in the broader living standard, issues like traffic congestion and having to live in a high-rise apartment instead of a house and those sorts of things, quality of life actually has fallen. And it's pretty obvious that that's the empirical evidence, and everyone has lived it, especially if you live in Sydney and Melbourne and places like that. And for this guy to come out there and claim the opposite, that it's actually good for us, is complete gaslighting. Especially when we've got the worst housing crisis in generations, and people basically living in their cars and in tents.
Yes. Yeah, people shouldn't forget that. What about international students? I assume that they come here under the student's visa and they graduate. Then do they occupy one of these skill shortage positions that are available, or what do they generally do? Do we know?
Yeah, we do know, actually. Some data came out during the migration review, and it actually showed that, Australia obviously has unbelievable numbers of international students. We have the highest concentration in the world given our population size. We absolutely dwarf Canada and the UK and all these other places with our numbers. Effectively, 1 in 30 people in Australia right now is either on a student visa or a graduate visa, which is handed out after you finish your studies.
Hang on. And did you just say 1 in 30 of us are a foreign student or a graduated foreign student? Is that what you said?
Yeah, well, no, actually, more than that would be graduated foreign student. Someone on a graduate visa is like a short-term visa once you finish your studies, so you can stay, work for a couple of years. So basically, yeah, 1 in 30 people in Australia is either on a student visa or on one of these short-term graduate visas, which is an extraordinary number. We've got about 850,000 roughly in the country right now on one of those two visas. And the actual data shows that just over half of international student graduates with a bachelor degree who've been in Australia after 3 years are working in low-skilled jobs. So those are what are called level 4 or level 5 jobs. So basically, when you break down the jobs, they're broken down from level 1, which is the highest skilled, to level 5, which is the lowest skilled. And more than half work in these two lowest skilled bands. And that's things like couriers, postal deliveries, cleaners, waiters, baristas, bar attendants. And these are supposed to be skilled workers. So they come over here, they go to university, etc. They do a degree, a bachelor degree, but they're not working in skilled jobs. More than half, just over half, 51%, working in these lower skilled jobs, the bottom 40% of jobs.
Yeah.
So this whole notion that we just need to, and obviously the international students drive Australia's net overseas migration. They're the key conduit.
Yes.
And this guy, Brendan Rynne, saying we need more of it, otherwise productivity is going to suffer. It's like, no. Productivity is suffering because of this, because we're bringing in so many, and most of them work in low-skilled, low-paid jobs. And there's another survey, Luke, called the Graduate Outcomes Survey that's put together every year. And that shows that international student graduates are paid way less than local graduates. So, for example, in 2022, the average salary for a domestic student graduate was $68,000, whereas it's $60,000 for an international. So that's $8,000 less. They also have much lower proportion working in full-time jobs. The overall employment rate's less, and their participation rate in the labour force is less. So the outcomes are a lot worse for international students.
So it looks to me like the only thing that the international student program achieves is increasing the income, I won't say wealth, but the income of the tertiary sector. Without being unkind, is that close to the mark?
Oh, 100%. That is the issue. They effectively are the middleman to Australia's migration system. So, and we've got to bear in mind that the universities here are untaxed, right? They are not for profits. They don't get taxed, but they run like private institutions, private businesses, corporations in a sense, in that they're headed by $1 million vice chancellors and an army of highly paid administrators whose sole purpose is basically to pump through as much volume as possible for maximum revenue, and they're the ones who are effectively creaming this. But the costs are pushed onto everyone else. So, for example, the universities don't provide enough student accommodation, as we know. So all these students end up, obviously, most of them end up in the private rental market, which is one of the reasons we've got a rental crisis. At the same time, obviously, it creates stresses for infrastructure and all these other things. So effectively, this is, that the universities are privatising the gains from immigration while the costs are socialised on the rest of us. And the numbers are just way too high, and we need to basically have a much lower number of very highly skilled, genuine students here, who would boost productivity, and they would end up graduating into high-paid jobs and high-skilled jobs rather than just going for maximum volume, which has been the Australian approach for nearly 2 decades.
The university sector should be responsible for housing these international students, shouldn't they? And they shouldn't be out there renting a whole bunch of private dwellings. They should find a way to use some of their wealth to have, and some of them already have to some extent this, but There should be, housing, appropriate housing on these huge campuses. Shouldn't there? Aren't they responsible for that? They don't contribute via the tax system to assisting the building of infrastructure, which is what's required. So isn't it up to them? Shouldn't it be up to them to house these international students?
Yeah, and the federal government should require it. They should basically make a mandate. So if you're, say, Sydney University and you want to bring in, you want to have 2,000 international students on campus, you should have to provide at least 1,000 on-campus accommodation for those international students, or some sort of ratio like that.
Yeah, fair enough.
That would be a fair way to do it. And I guarantee you, if they were required to do that, the numbers would fall.
Yes.
Because those costs would be internalised. I'd also like to see a levy on international students. Levied a flat fee per international student, so that way the taxpayer can actually get some return from this, rather than because we're the ones who effectively bear the cost through infrastructure and all these other issues.
Yeah.
So we need to internalise the cost and basically mean that the university sector, the tertiary sector, so not just universities, vocational education providers, all those sorts of things, don't just get the gains; they've got to share in the costs as well. Because at the moment they get all the gains, but the costs are being borne by the broader population and taxpayers.
Exactly. Macrobusiness.com.au. I check it out every day because it's very fascinating, very interesting, and it's in-depth analysis you don't generally get around the economy and those matters. Leith Van Onselen, co-founder of macrobusiness.com.au. Thank you very much, my friend. I'll talk to you through the year.
Thanks, Luke. Appreciate it.
Good on you.